Hey, what's up, Chad?
I'm here.
Pardon if it looks like I'm talking, but nothing's coming through. I've got my mic off, and Carmen's talking sometimes, so it might come through the VTube avatar.
On the lines back in the 80s on the lines back in the 80s with INCOMM and was working with them directly and had access to a number of confidential issues and guidelines and policies that Hubbard wrote, and these advice letters, these dispatches that were going back and forth. He had seen all of these. In fact, he had seen them and studied them. So not just once or twice, he actually did some very intensive study. So he was a wealth of information on this, and he let me know that Hubbard had just kind of lost it with management for the nth time and was like, okay, I want computers to be doing all this, okay? And the idea was that the computer system would be set up at INCOMM so that it would receive hundreds, thousands of data points from all over the world about Scientology in every single organization. And this system was supposed to be the ultimate in micromanagement, down to every individual staff member. So in Scientology, I've done a video laying out the hierarchy of Scientology, but that video really only scratches the surface of how crazy the Scientology management philosophy is. And Hubbard had the idea that every staff member would fill in a weekly report. Every Thursday at 2, it would go up to management and eventually end up at INCOMM. These reports would be scanned into the computers and indexed. And this was something that didn't even begin to touch reality until I was in management in the 2000s, when these reports were routinely being scanned in and indexed. Up until then, the reports might have been received and scanned, but nobody was really doing much of anything with them. And so you just had reams and reams and reams of years worth of these reports from all the various staff members about what they did that week in their job, right? And there were all kinds of things to fill in these reports. For example, if you were like me, if I would, when I was a course room supervisor and I was getting people through their classes, I had the list on my report every week who finished what classes and who started new classes, right, by name, and what class they started. And the computer was supposed to actually be able to track every single person who was buying services and doing services at every single church all over the world, at every level of Scientology, staff members and public people. And the idea was the computer would receive these reports, and there were not just staff member weekly reports, there were also there were personnel files, right? We talk about in Scientology how they do these very invasive life histories where they ask you everything about your life, every single person you've ever slept with, every single sickness you've ever had, every job you've ever had, like everything, all your relatives, all your friends, all your connections, that's all supposed to be part of the life history. All of that goes into a database at International Management under INCOMM. And there are also routing forms, okay? And these, I won't get into a whole big thing on this, but basically when somebody is doing some activity in a Scientology organization, they have a sheet of paper that lists every single person you need to see in the organization and what order you need to see them in order to get something done. For example, if you want to walk into a Church of Scientology and get started on a class, you're going to be put on a routing form that at the top of it says student on to class routing form. And the first person you're going to see is the salesperson who's going to sell you the course and take your money. And then you're going to go to the bookstore officer and he's going to sell you the course pack and any books that you need. And if you need to buy an e-meter, he'll sell you that too. And it's right there on the routing form what to do. Buy the books that you need for this course, right? Then you go to the course administrator and he logs your name and takes all of your information and schedules you, and then you see the course supervisor and you actually get started on the class. So all of this could be done without this piece of paper, but the piece of paper is supposed to ensure that every single person is treated the same and every single person gets every single step done that they're supposed to in order to do whatever action it is that they're doing. And there are hundreds of routing forms in Scientology for every single thing that's supposed to go on in a Church of Scientology. So all of these routing forms were made scannable so that a carbon copy of them could be sent up to INCOMM every week, and the computer was supposed to be able to get this information and scan it and see every person in every church who's doing every service, every staff member, when they started, when they left, everything, all the little data points that are supposed to go up to this computer system are supposed to be fed into it so that it can detect errors or problems in these organizations before the humans do. For example, let's say that Joe Schmo starts a course and the routing form tells the computer that he started a course, and the weekly report from the course supervisor tells the computer that Joe Schmo started this course. Well, let's say 2 or 3 weeks go by and there's no notice to the computer that Joe Schmo has finished his course. So the computer is supposed to be able to send an alert down to that church, that org, to the supervisor and say, how come Joe Schmo hasn't finished his course yet? This is the level of micromanagement, all the way down to every single person, right? So never mind all of the hierarchy of management that exists. This computer system is supposed to actually take over and run this whole show itself, which is, it almost sounds plausible, kind of. At least it did to me when I was a staff member. But as you can imagine, all of this paper that we were filling out every week became more important than the people that we were actually dealing with. Excuse me. What's more is the computer system in its infancy, when they first set this thing up and as far as they got it running, all it could get up to doing was nudging people on things, right? And there's more things that it would nudge people on. I could explain a whole slew of stuff about how Scientology churches are run and managed, because there's programs and there's basically a lot of excuses to send a lot of nudges and demands down to every single staff member in every single church. And the computer system was programmed to do this. So it became, as one person described, and which I thought was absolutely spot on, this computer system became the first spam machine ever invented, because this started up back in the 80s, before email was even a glimmer in anybody's eye. Okay, so the churches were getting printouts of these nudges that were going down to the orgs. I mean, we got reams of these things. I was a staff member in Santa Barbara starting in 1987, and I would come across these piles of paper, and we were supposed to file all these pieces of paper and all the files for all the staff members and stuff. And actually, what we ended up doing was using it for scrap paper, because it was so useless. These nudges and ethics orders and non-compliance chits and demands to get things done were so unrealistic, because they didn't match up with anything, because the system was faulty. It was Swiss cheese. It had so many holes in it that it really was just something to ignore. And that was the practical application of this genius idea of L. Ron Hubbard. Now, where did L. Ron Hubbard get the idea that this would be something to do? Okay, you guys are going to love this. This has been talked about here and there, but it's a very arcane or difficult piece of Scientology lore to find or corroborate, because it only exists in these dispatches that Hubbard had, these communications Hubbard had with the very first people who were setting up INCOMM. And very, very few people have been exposed to or had access to those dispatches. Okay, I'm talking about like a handful of people. So the fact that we know about this at all is actually pretty amazing. This, compared to the number of people who know about Xenu, I mean, we're talking about a very tiny number of people. So, all right, the dispatches say that there was a planet called Chug millions and millions of years ago. And Chug was run by the Duke of Chug. We never found out his name. He was always just the Duke of Chug. And he apparently was raising taxes on his population, the people of Chug. But the planet was managed by this high-tech computer system that ran this galactic empire, okay? And I don't think that this planet Chug or any of this had anything to do with Xenu or Markab or that whole other fantasy of Hubbard's. This was its own thing, okay? Now, so Chug is monitored by this computer system, this monstrous, ruthlessly efficient computer system, which detects that taxes are going up, but revenues are not increasing from Chug to the central dictatorship or central confederation or whatever the government system was. And it goes, hey, wait a minute, where's this money going? And the computer, having access to anything and everything that it needs in terms of records, quickly went through the accounting systems and banking systems and finance systems of Chug and found out that old Duke of Chug was embezzling that money. He was taking it for himself. And the computer went, oh, and without any alert to any human being or anybody, the computer system went through its personnel records of all the rulers and politicians and people or whatever, however the system was set up, and it found a worthy replacement for the Duke of Chug, and the computer then ordered that the Duke of Chug be executed for embezzlement. And this was all carried out at the orders of the computer, and a new ruler was installed, and that is the story that Hubbard based this entire concept of computerized management on, and communicated to his juniors, to these guys who were setting up INCOMM. Now, in the video that I made about the hierarchy of Scientology, I talked about how the whole system was a little ridiculous because of the number of people who would issue orders to, every single staff member would get orders from 3, 4, 5 different people. At every echelon this occurs because of the screwy way that Hubbard set up the system. Then that whole system, which is bad enough, was then subverted by David Miscavige so that he became dictator and overall ruler of this, and whatever he says goes and gets filtered down the lines to everybody. And that is why Scientology is so horribly inefficient. But then when you add this computer system on top of it, it just makes it 10 times worse because of all the spamming of all these unreal, these ridiculous orders that are going on. If you can imagine the difficulties that Facebook and Twitter and Google have with their algorithms, right? And these are modern, top-of-the-line, very well-educated teams of programmers who are working very hard to get those algorithms working to accomplish certain tasks within the world of social media or within the world of internet access. You can imagine that the handful, the tiny little number of programmers that have been working at INCOMM in the Sea Org over all these years have not managed to work out any of this stuff. And so the poor staff members of all these churches of Scientology all over the world are being bombarded not only by people coming in to see them all the time and deal with, and order them around to do different things, most of which are ridiculous and have to do with making money. But they're then bombarded by these orders from this computer system too. So anyway, Hubbard, it was interesting to me to find all of this out because David Miscavige is known as somebody in his management style and in the way that he runs Scientology as somebody who doesn't like people very much. And he has been trying to replace human beings at different points in the Scientology system. For example, the salespeople. He wants to replace them with audio-visual videos that will tell people about services and get them to buy the services rather than have a person sit there and sell you. David Miscavige's ideal picture is that a TV will sell you. And that also happened, that also has replaced most of the effort being made in the churches when it comes to bringing new people and dealing with brand new people off the street. They're supposed to just wander around in these churches and see these audio-visual displays of what is Dianetics and what is Scientology and what is an e-meter and and what is applied scholastics. All these front groups for Scientology, they all have videos made that tell you all about them. And the reason for that was to replace people so that people wouldn't be there screwing it all up. And because the video will tell you everything you need to know. And then, if you have any questions, well, maybe then a human will step in. But that was supposed to be the thing that was going to sell you. But I didn't know that L. Ron Hubbard was the one who actually wanted to replace people first back in the day with these computers because he was so fed up with the inefficiencies and mistakes of management who were all trying to operate in a system he had created, which I guess in his final days, Hubbard didn't really see the error of his own ways and was a little, so full of himself that he didn't quite get how the whole thing was kind of his fault. Anyway, I thought this might be interesting to some of you folks out there in terms of another aspect of the inefficiencies of Scientology and why it is that this group is really never going to get anywhere. had done one of their beginning services called Purification Rundown, which is the sauna sweating thing, and I'll tell you about. And then they recruited me to be on staff, and I started working at the Santa Barbara organization. And this is all out in California. So, how many of you guys has anybody here seen the documentary Going Clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of you guys? Okay. Have any of you guys watched anything from me or otherwise on YouTube about Scientology? Just a little bit. Okay, great, good. So, great. Then I'm just going to throw everything at you because a lot of you guys don't know anything. This is wonderful. All right, so, Scientology's, I don't know how it's regarded around here, but in general, I think it's been looked at as kind of this kind of crazy, kooky sort of science fiction cult or something John Travolta does or something Tom Cruise does, and that's kind of about the extent of it. At least until fairly recently, when the Going Clear documentaries come out, and maybe a bit before that, where some very high-level Scientologists, it goes on at the inner circle of the highest levels of that organization, and it started becoming more apparent that it's not just a kooky cult, it's actually a very destructive activity. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about. So first, what I want to do is just tell you my own history with it, then I'll talk about some of the cult aspects of it, and how in the last 2 years or so since I left working for Scientology, I've come all the way out of it. And because it was a gradual process, and it's taken me 2 years, and now I'm at where I'm at, where I don't consider myself in any way, shape, or form a Scientologist at all. Does that make sense?
What are you?
I guess if I had a label, it would be...
Are you a theist or...
if I had a label, it would be agnostic. Yeah, I just don't know. I have faith, I have certain spiritual beliefs, but they're not based on Scientology doctrine. Okay, so let's see here. I started working for the organization in 1987, and that was for the Church of Scientology of Santa Barbara. It was there's levels of churches in Scientology, and the one here in Cincinnati is what's they call them orbs, by the way. They don't call them churches. They call them churches to you guys. They don't call them churches inside. They call them orbs, which is short for organizations. The religious trappings of Scientology are very much that. They are religious trappings. They're a window display. That's not really how the organization considers itself. It has a religious philosophy to it because they consider that it's religious because they're dealing with man as a spiritual being, as opposed to man a body. So that's what makes it religious. If you really get down to it, why is Scientology considered a religious organization? That's why.
For the tax rate.
That too. Yeah. So it's not. It's a bit of a sham as far as that whole thing goes. So the way that I got involved with it, people, there's this sort of misconception amongst people who don't know a lot about this kind of subject that people who get involved in Scientology or other destructive cults are kind of morons or idiots, and they should know better. And the fact of the matter is that if you actually study this subject for any length of time, you find out that the more intelligent you are, it kind of opens you up to this a little bit more. It doesn't have a lot to do with how smart you are. It has to do with critical thinking skills, and which is kind of different from intelligence. And it has to do with common sense a bit, for sure. I will definitely be the first to tell you that I had absolutely no common sense whatsoever getting involved in that group. But I'm a very smart guy, and so are a lot of other Scientologists. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a moron or any of them are, because that just wouldn't be true. The intelligence factor actually helps a person justify and rationalize why they're going into these crazy belief systems. And that's an important thing to understand about cults. It's just something I've run across, so I thought I'd mention that. So I got involved, like I said, I did some classes for 2 years, off and on while I was in high school. And here's the other factor about that. The beginning level services of Scientology or the introductory things with any cult make some sense, because nobody would get involved the very first class that I ever did in Scientology was a communications course. I was 15 years old. I walked in there thinking that this wasn't going to be the thing for me. I mean, my parents, yeah, sure, but not for me. And they sat me down, and I did one of these personality tests, and they come up with this graph, and it's your personality all plotted out. And they convinced me, without a whole lot of needing to convince me, because I was 15 years old, that I was shy, I was introverted, and I had a hard time talking to girls, which was very true. All of those things, 100% across the boards. And I had this very good-looking blonde woman telling me, well, you know, that's ruining your life. That's what they're looking for, is the thing that's ruining your life. And in Scientology terms, they call it your ruin. And every single person who walks in the door, that's what they want to find. Because there's very few of us who have perfect lives. I think most people would look at some part of our life and go, yeah, I think there's something I'd like to change or improve, you know, to make my life better. That's the thing that they hook you with. They find out what that is, and they ask you 200 of the craziest questions to get this graph to figure that out, right? And this graph comes out with traits like how communicative you are, how happy you are, how responsible you are, how well you get along with others. All of this is shown very scientifically on this graph, right? Very, very scientifically. So, sarcasm, but. So with this graph and with this ruin that I had called communication, right? It's like, yes, I can communicate, and I want to ask girls out, and I want to be able to communicate better. They said, great. And this was where they got me. She looks at me and she goes, we have a class that will handle that. And I just about fell out of my chair, because I've been living with this ruin for years, and here's somebody offering me a $50 class that will handle it. It will go away. You will no longer have that problem. Sign me up right now, right? And which is, of course, what happened. And I did this communications class, and I'm not going to lie, it helped. It was very common sense principles. It was, you know, being able to talk. It was look somebody in the eye when you're talking to them. It was, you know, there were drills, there were practical exercises that you do so to overcome shyness or embarrassment or things like that, right? And when I went back to school following that summer, people noticed I was different. And that, you know, all right, right? So that was pretty good. And I was into that. And so Scientology works, right? Because you get this first thing and you go, well, that worked. Now, for those of you who might be familiar with any of this, there's no Xenu, there's no space aliens, there's no even past life stuff to start with. None of that enters into it. It's just communication, or it's just study, or it's just your marriage, or it's just your job, or whatever the individual thing is for you. That's all Scientology is for you when you start. You get hooked on this thing, and not everybody does. Some people come in, they do the first class, and they go, no, and you never see them again. But for those who stay, it's because it did something for them. Then they offer you the next class, and they never trip up on what your next class or your next service is going to be. They got it all laid out. So you do the next class, and maybe that first class was $50. Well, this next one is $75. But hey, that communication really helped, right? Oh, absolutely, good. Well, then let's go. And you do the next one and the next one, and before you know it, you're paying $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a pop for these services as you're progressing up this ladder of services that they offer. They offer classes, and they offer individual counseling services, which they call auditing. They call it auditing because the word audit, audio, means to listen. And that's so the counselors listen to you. So it's auditing. Make sense? Yeah? Yeah. Well, it is.
Sign me up.
Yeah, right away. So, anyway, that's the progression of services, and that's how I kind of got hooked into it, and that's how everybody gets hooked into it. What I just explained to you is exactly how it works for every single person who ever got involved with it, okay? And when you start doing a few of these things, and you get all like, you know, wow, this is really helping me, and this is really changing my life, well, you want to go tell your friends and your family, and you get, you know, and you start getting other people in, and that's how most people actually in Scientology got into Scientology, is it was through friends I'm second generation, for example, right? I never would have gotten in if my dad hadn't said, why don't you go check it out? You know, so that's how folks get in. So I was doing this for 2 years, kind of liked what I was doing, and I was going to go to college, I was going to be a teacher, I was going to be a writer, and they said, no, what we really want you to do is we want you to come work for us. Oh, okay. And this is where the real love bombing started for me. You guys ever heard that term, love bombing? It's where they basically throw so much admiration and love at you that you're just like, wow, I feel great right now. And they kind of sucker you into becoming more part of the movement. And the way they did that was they had this, again, another really beautiful blonde woman start telling me, you know, I'm 17 years old now, and she's like, oh, you are just so smart. Oh, you are so amazing. It's kind of interesting because it's sort of the reverse of how they get you in. They get you in by telling you how awful and horrible and, you know, how there's something really wrong with you. But they get you on staff by telling you how wonderful you are and what a great asset you would be and how, you know, what superpowers you have and how, you know, they're going to help you have even more, right? And you're going to be part of something that is changing the world. And it's going to save the planet, right? In Scientology terms, they call it clearing the planet. Right? They're going to clear the planet. They're going to make everybody, you know, this wonderful state called clear, which I can tell you a little bit more about later, but it's this higher level of existence. And the idea is that you have no fears, irrational impulses, things like that. That's clear. And what Scientology wants to do is they want to clear the planet. And this is important to understand because people in Scientology, or all of these destructive cults that I've come to find out, aren't running around thinking they're in a destructive cult. They don't see it from outside. They're in it. And they believe that what they're doing is very powerful and very real and very much something that is going to change the world for the better. That's really where their head's at. And it's important to understand that, I guess, for a group like this, because if you want to engage somebody like that or change hearts and minds, you got to have to kind of come at them recognizing that that's where their head's at. And if you're going to change their mind, you're going to have to go through some of that. Does that make sense? It's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do. Okay, so I worked for the Santa Barbara Church for 8 years. And that was an interesting experience. It was right out of high school, and it was the first time away from home. And although my parents were Scientologists, they weren't really keen on me going to work for the organization, but they kind of let me do it. And it was a struggle. The lower level churches of Scientology are not financially well off. It was a constant struggle for survival, keeping the doors open, paying the rent, delivering, trying to get new people in and that sort of thing. Even though we were on the busiest street in Santa Barbara and we had like thousands of people walking by every day, it was constantly, working to try to save the world. And I was very frustrated by it because when you think you have the answer and you really think you got it, you really want to get it out there to people, and we weren't doing it. And there's an interesting thing in the policies. L. Ron Hubbard is the guy who came up with Scientology. He wrote Dianetics in 1950, which was the modern science of mental health. That's what he called it, Dianetics, the modern science of mental health. And it was a science. There was no Scientology, there was no religion to it. It was all about making people better through this process called auditing and clearing them, getting rid of their psychosomatic illnesses and mental issues and trauma and stress. And that took off. That was a legitimate bestseller in 1950. It really hit the country by storm, and it offered a method for people like you and me to sit down without years of psychotherapy training and basically practice psychotherapy on each other with this method that was described in the book Dianetics. And the idea was it was a self-help methodology that could take you to this higher level of higher state of being. So that really took off, and Hubbard ran around doing lectures, and they set up professional foundations, and they were selling professional auditing, and the whole thing tanked after about 2 years, and it went totally bankrupt. Mismanagement and all kinds of nonsense. No Scientologist will tell you that, because they don't actually know that, but because because that's all sort of buried history, and there's been a lot of historical revisionism. And instead, what they tell you is through his brilliance, he then, came on with further developments, L. Ron Hubbard did, and came up with Scientology, because Scientology is about man as a spiritual being. And how that came about was people were doing this Dianetics procedure on each other, where they were recalling incidents in their past that were traumatic, that had stress, that had pain, and had unconsciousness as part of the incident. Part of Dianetics is that those incidents are what make you act irrationally now. It's sort of a, pseudo-Freud sort of thing. And there is a legitimate euphoria and sort of, very nice feeling that comes from doing this sometimes on some people. It's not universally workable, not everybody responds to it, but for those who do, man, they just love it. They think this is like the bomb, right? So what Hubbard said was that people were recalling as they were going back in their life. He claimed in Dianetics that you could go all the way back to your birth, because birth is a very traumatic incident involving a lot of pain and a lot of unconsciousness for the baby and for the mother, right? So if you could, recall that whole thing and get rid of that and all the trauma and stress associated with that, you'd reach this state of clear. Well, he then said, well, people were recalling things earlier than this life through Dianetics techniques. And they were going back to earlier lives, and therefore it looks like there's more to life than just this lifetime. And that's how Scientology kind of started. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So, anyway, so that's sort of where Scientology got going. Dianetics tanks, but he picks it up with Scientology and he says, hey guys, we're gonna bring everybody to this, even higher state of existence and higher state of being, and it's gonna be a wonderful thing, and we're gonna save the whole world. And everybody was like, okay, yeah, we're on board with that. Or at least some of them were enough to keep it going. And it is where it is now. So that's Scientology. So now here I was working for the organization. It wasn't taking off. It wasn't succeeding. It wasn't doing well. As well as writing all of what he called the technical materials of Scientology, the auditing methodologies, Hubbard also wrote a lot of policy letters. And policy was for how to run his churches. He formed up all these churches all over the world as it progressed through the 50s and the 60s. And all these churches needed operating guidelines and rules and regulations as to how to operate, just like any organization does. Hubbard wrote all of it. All of it was according to his word. Nobody else had any input or any say in it. So there's thousands of these policy letters, and they're on green ink, but they tell you how to run the organization. And one of the things in those policy letters is, if you follow the policy letters, then everything will be great, and you'll expand and you'll succeed, because this is all tried and tested and proven, and Hubbard's saying, I did it and I succeeded, and so you guys should too. So reversely, what we used to run on ourselves, and this is important for the mindset, is if we're not successful and booming and productive and expanding, it's our fault. Because we're somehow screwing up what Hubbard said to do. You see the little twist there?
And there's no flaws allowed to be in the policy.
Exactly. Exactly. It's always back on you. This is a really important point, because it's you really buy into it as a Scientologist. You really get to buying into this viewpoint that Hubbard is flawless. That this guy, L. Ron Hubbard, and they built this guy up like you would not believe. They got offices in every one of the churches for him, even though he's been dead since 1986. They have, pictures of him in every single room in the churches. If you go down to Cincinnati, I'm telling you, everywhere you go, you'll see pictures of this guy. And his whole life has been built up as folklore, as legendary. He was fully professional in 26 different fields, and all these different things that they just feed you, and and you buy it. And I did, and you kind of start walking around with this idea: how did this guy do this? I mean, he's just a guy, but how did? And you kind of rationalize it and you justify it. And yeah, okay, he was just this really amazing guy. So here I am in this organization, and I'm thinking that the only reason why the 10 or 12 staff members who are working there all these years, working their asses off really, weren't making it was not because there was something wrong with Scientology, and it was not because something was wrong with Hubbard. It was us. It was all on us, all the time. And this is mentioned in the Going Clear documentary. Anything good that happens to you in Scientology is because of L. Ron Hubbard and his brilliance. And anything bad that happens, it's on you.
Sounds like Christianity.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of similarities. I don't want to, I'll just say right now, just kind of get this out of the way, I'm not big on organized religion, period. So, I'm kind of same there, yeah. That's one of the lessons. Yeah, one of the lessons that I learned from this whole thing was, and I learned a lot of lessons coming out of this, is that organized religion, I think, as a whole, is a fairly in the terms destructive cult for a reason. And I will go over later on exactly what I'm talking about that. Okay, so we're clear on what I mean. As far as the mindset goes, I'm telling you about this because when I was 25, rather than leave Scientology as a failure, like this thing has just not going anywhere and it's all just a bunch of crap, I had it all on me, right? It's my fault and our organization's fault that we're not expanding. So what I need to do is I need to take more responsibility. I need to do more because I really want this to work. So what I did is I joined the next highest level organization in Scientology, which is called the Sea Organization, S-E-A, sea as in ocean, right, naval. The Sea Organization is the clergy of Scientology. It's the inner circle. It's the highest level group you can work for. It's full-time. It's monastic. It's 24/7. It's a group of people that's about 4,000 or 5,000 people strong worldwide. It's a paramilitary organization. It's modeled after the Navy. They have naval uniforms. They have naval ranks, insignia, and inside they call each other sir, and their salutes and all of that, right? And this group is in the Scientology world. This group is the most hardcore, dedicated, responsible, tough, ethical. Like these are the guys to look up to. The Sea Organization. Yeah, I want to be one of those guys. They're just the shit, right? So I decided that I would go to Los Angeles and I would join up with that group. And so in 1985, I joined that group. And I went down to Los Angeles, and I was doing that because the word responsibility is a loaded word in Scientology. Responsibility has a lot of different connotations, but in Scientology it means, it's all on you, right? And everything that happens in your life, in the end, you're responsible for. It's on you. You made that happen. And it gets mystical, I'm telling you, like any level of stuff, right? And this is in Hubbard's works. So I wanted to take the most responsibility that I could for myself and for the world and for the planet and for all of you, and I wanted to do it all, right? So I was going to join the Sea Org, and that was the way I was going to do it. And well, anyway, that's kind of a rough group, the Sea Organization, because like I said, it's 24/7. Your room is cared for. I mean, they have their own facilities. They're called Sea Org bases, like naval bases, right? And there's a big one in Los Angeles. Los Angeles has the highest concentration of Scientologists anywhere. There's thousands of them. The next highest concentration is in Clearwater, Florida, which is where there's a very large central base of Scientology is in Clearwater, Florida. That's sort of they used to, before it was politically incorrect to do so, they used to refer to Clearwater as the Mecca of Scientology. They don't use that word anymore, but that's what it was, right? The Mecca. And that's where you go to get the highest level services of Scientology. And when I talk about this level of services, and I really should get better at this and bring one of these things. They have this chart, and it's called the grade chart, right, or the bridge to total freedom. And it's got all these services on it that you climb this bridge, you go over this bridge, and the idea I went down to Los Angeles and I was working down there. Interestingly, according to my information from when I was in, I'll just share this with you, the highest concentration is Los Angeles, then Clearwater, then is a toss-up between Portland and the Bay Area in California. Those are the two other areas where there's just tons of them. They're just crawling all over the place. And outside of that, it gets pretty small pretty fast. So I was working 24/7 for the core group of Scientology. And basically, what happens there is you're paid $50 a week. Here's your spending money. Maybe. It's very irregular. Sometimes you get 30, sometimes you get 50. It all depends on, if we made enough that week. And anyway, there's all the financial nonsense. There's lots of money in Scientology, but no, Scientologists don't see it. It all goes up to the top. Money in Scientology goes up, it never comes down. That's kind of how the money works. And when you're in the mindset, you don't question it. You're like, yeah, the leader, who's now currently, by the way, the current leader of Scientology is named David Miscavige. And he basically took over in the early 80s, actually before Hubbard had passed. Miscavige was already in charge, because Hubbard was in hiding for tax evasion and other criminal activities, which again, no Scientologist is going to talk about or even know anything about, because it's all, very revised history. But that's the truth of it. That's what was going on. So Miscavige took over, and he's been running the whole show ever since. And if you think about it in the Scientology world, again in the mindset, he deserves everything. He's like God, Miscavige is. He is if Hubbard is God, Miscavige is the voice of God. I mean, I can make analogies all night, but basically he's the guy who deserves the utmost respect and admiration of anybody in the world beyond L. Ron Hubbard. And that's how Scientologists think of David Miscavige. So when they see him running around and driving a Mercedes or in the best clothes and the best suits and everything, they go, well, he deserves it for all the hard work that he does and all of everything that he's done for Scientology and that sort of thing. And Miscavige is the guy who's at the top of the chain of command of the Sea Organization. He is in the Sea Organization. That's what he is. He's the leading officer of the Sea Org. So all the Sea Org just love him. They just can't get enough of the guy. So I arrived in the Sea Org in Los Angeles, and in 1995, and I immediately went into church management. The Sea Organization handles all management of all of the churches worldwide, from the Cincinnati one to the Denver one to the Las Vegas one to the Copenhagen one to the one down in Perth, Australia. All of those are managed by the Sea Organization from these central bases. There's a Sea Org base in Los Angeles. There's one in Sydney, Australia. There's one in Copenhagen, Denmark. There's one in the United Kingdom, and I think that's actually most of them is those bases. So, and they have the whole world divided up, and I was in management. Oh yeah, there's one in New York for the Eastern United States. You guys, Cincinnati here is managed by New York. So I worked in Los Angeles, and I was managing everything west of the Mississippi River. That's the largest, most prosperous, most successful region of Scientology internationally is the Western United States. That's where a lot of the money is. That's where most of the wealthy Scientologists live. That's why. And they have the highest concentration of Scientologists in those areas. So I was managing, I immediately got put into charge of managing all of the classes and all of the auditing delivery that was going on in all of the churches in the Western United States. And I did that for, about 8 or 9 years. And it's an interesting, their management philosophy is very interesting. Again, just to kind of give you some more on the mindset, there's a term in Scientology in the Sea Organization called making it go right. You make it go right. That's kind of the mantra. So when I first got in there wasn't a lot of training. There wasn't a lot of I didn't go to business school. I didn't go to, I didn't have read all of Hubbard's policies even on how to do this. I didn't really know what I was doing. Neither did most other people that I was working with. Dude, make it go right. Figure it out. Okay. And you kind of thrown into this, and it's just go. So all right, we're gonna go. And you start directing churches knowing what to do, and when you screw up, you get slapped around, and then you know, kind of, okay, I won't do that again, and then you kind of carry on, and you're making it go right. And that went on for quite some time. It's kind of like, the whole spirit of the thing is sort of like, if I took one of you guys right now and I said, okay, let's go out and I'm gonna, I don't know, go to some hostage negotiation situation, right? Go talk the guy down. Let's go, you know? But make it go right.
What? You came out just as spiritually advanced as you thought you were?
Exactly. And you do. You know, and that's the spirit of the thing, right? So, in other words, there's no excuses. There's never an excuse for failing. There's never an excuse for not making it go. And again, it just is part of the mindset, and that's why I'm telling you about it, right? It's a different mindset from how you operate in the real world. It's its own little world. And there is a point to all of this, which is, of course, that, you know, when you're in a destructive cult, your mind and your viewpoint of the world changes, and it changes radically. And because you agree to these things. You know, at any point along the line, I could have said, yeah, make this go right, you know, and I could have just like walked out the door, right? But I didn't, and neither do the other people in those groups. They agree to these things, and they are coerced into it, and they go along with it, and you just get into this mindset. So, actually, it took me until 2003 before I burned out on that. 8 years of managing organizations, and I could tell you guys stories like all night long about how crazy it was to do that, but it was just kind of like being in, you know, like the call center. You guys know like those call centers, you know, like, or the stock market, you know, like these high pressure situations. There were these people, you know, you kind of go in there and it's just very intense every second, all the way through.
Boiler.
That was that?
Boiler.
Yeah, boiler rooms, that's right. That is what it's like in the Sea Organization all the time. It's always like that. There's always an emergency. There is always something crazy going on that you have to make go right, that you have to deal with. And it took me a long time before it dawned on me that it was being kept that way on purpose. Because you just dive into it and you're like, oh God, I gotta handle this, and then, gotta handle it, and you don't have a lot of time to think. That's kind of on purpose. Right? They don't want you thinking a lot. They just want you doing what you're doing and making a lot of money. It's all about money. This all focuses on money, by the way. So, I was done with management by 2003. I kind of burned out on it, but I was still in this group called the Sea Organization, and I didn't leave that. I just couldn't deal with the management part anymore. So I kind of bounced around for about a year doing different things. And have any of you guys ever heard of something called the RPF, or the Rehabilitation Project Force in Scientology? Some of you, maybe one or two? Okay. If I said Maoist reconditioning camp, would that like make sense to anybody? Like sort of like a place you would go where you would be reconditioned, where you would be, you know, any sort of bad thinking, sort of Orwellian sort of thinking, right? Any sort of like bad thoughts you might be having. Because remember, if something bad is happening to you in Scientology, it's your fault. It's on you. It's never L. Ron Hubbard. It's never the organization. And this is actually, in case any of you guys were wondering why it is that they do what they do in the press, attacking their critics, constantly going after them, doing all the crazy things they do, it's because the organization can never be wrong. Ever. Every Scientologist totally buys into this, right? So, when you get to the place where I was at after 8 years of this, where I was just kind of, they send you to this thing called the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, and it is, wow. I got no words for it except that it's like a Maoist reconditioning camp. It's like prison. Even within the Sea Organization, which is 24/7, you know, you get a day off once in a while. Okay, in the last 5 5 years that I worked for the Sea Organization, I can count on one hand how many days off I had. It was 24/7, 7 days a week. That is how it is in the Sea Organization. You just do that. And my work day was not 9 to 5. My work day was get up in the morning about 8:30 and go to bed about midnight. All the time. You just work. Just work. So that was the Sea Organization. You get into the RPF, and it is strict by Sea Organization standards. Like, there's no days off. You're segregated from the rest of the group. You get to wear black and gray. Like, you're literally like in prison, right? You can't talk to anybody outside of the RPF if you're not spoken to first. I was married. Nope. No more seeing the wife, right, while you're doing this thing. And Christmas was just another day. There's no holidays, there's no special nothing, right? And your pay is a third. You get a third pay. So now you're down to like $12 a week.
I bet you didn't get the full 8 hours of sleep right there.
No, it's crazy. It's beyond. And you spend 5 hours a day doing this rehabilitation where you're doing this auditing procedure. You sit down with somebody else and you work that out. You work out all your problems and various issues that you have that landed you there in the first place. And the rest of your day is spent on hard physical labor, right? Where you're like, I learned how to make furniture in a mill, and I did a lot of cleaning and a lot of hauling stuff, and just the kind of work that nobody else really wants to do. They have the RPF guys do it. So I did that for 3 years and 3 months. And I finished it. Most people in the Sea Organization who get into that program don't make it through and they end up leaving. But I was dedicated. I was responsible, man. I was going to do it, right? And I got through it. And anyway, I'm really just kind of just barely touching on this, but it was the roughest 3 years of my life. I've never experienced anything like that, and I wouldn't wish it on.
Can you just clear something?
Yeah.
Did you volunteer for that? Or
No, I was sent to it.
you were sent?
Yeah, I was sent to it because I had screwed up, right? But I went willingly. I mean, they have you. It's not like if you don't want to do it, you leave the Sea Organization. It's sort of you do this or you're out of here.
And so you lose all your friends and your wife?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, the whole disconnection thing and all that. So I wanted to stay married. I loved my wife at the time. I'm not married anymore, but at the time I was, and I loved her. And in fact, I was at a place where that was about the only thing keeping me holding on at that particular point, because I was kind of screwed up as far as the Scientology goes and the organization goes, but I didn't want to lose my wife, I didn't want to lose my friends. And when you say Maoist reconditioning, you go through a program like that for 3 years where you're basically in a group of people who are force-feeding you how great Scientology is and how everything bad that just happened to you that landed you there is all on you. It's your fault. You're the one who screwed up, and you need to take responsibility for that and deal with it. You get into a frame of mind where, yeah, that's what happened. And then you graduate it, you get through it, 1 second, and now you're, okay, Scientology is great. This is really great. I really love this now, and you carry on. Fortunately, I never totally kind of bought into that, which sort of led me to getting out about 5 years later, once I finished the RPF. I lasted for about another 5 years, and then I left in 2012. But my experience is not, the example. Most people who do that program, if they last through it, think it's all wonderful and great, and they carry on with the Sea Organization. It's a little high. I know it sounds totally crazy, but I'm trying my best to explain it in terms that you guys can. It is crazy. Believe me, I'm not telling any of you guys this with the idea that any of this makes a lot of sense. None of this makes any sense. That's why it's a destructive cult. I'm just sharing my experiences with you. Does that, yeah? Okay. All right, so, yeah, anyway, when I graduated that thing, I definitely was not the same. And I did tell myself that I was never going to do it again. There are, believe it or not, some people who shouldn't exist anymore. So after I graduated that and I got back into, very lucky that this happened to me, is I started going out and working on recruiting new people to come, or new members for the Sea Organization. As you can imagine, if they have to recruit people for Scientology, they really have to recruit people to go be part of this Sea Organization. I mean, hardly anybody just goes and signs up for it. You know, it's just like military recruiters. You know, they'll sell you the sun, moon, and the stars about how great the Sea Organization is. Then when you're in, you're stuck. That's kind of, you know, it's a pretty good parallel. So I was doing recruitment for the Sea Organization. And so I went out to churches like the Cincinnati one here, or, you know, the Minnesota one, or the Denver one, and I would meet with Scientologists, because generally if you want to get somebody into the Sea Organization, you're not going to get them off the street. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. You got to be a pretty dedicated Scientologist to go put up with that kind of abuse. So I was talking to Scientologists, and I was telling them the wonders and greatness and fantasticness of being part of the Sea Organization, and how you know, how dedicated and hardworking and, you know, we were. And it's kind of like recruiting people from the Marines. I mean, if you really knew what the Marines were like, I don't think too many people would want to go be part of that, especially boot camp. But you can sell somebody on the symbolism of it, and the glory of it, and the wonderment of it, and the purpose of it. We're saving the planet. That's the big one. And so I was getting some people in doing that, and I was so successful at it that they decided to get me onto, I started moving over into this other program that was going on. Scientology as an organization is about money. In the end, that's really what it's about. And that's just no hype. That's what's going on. They're making money, and they're making a lot of it. Since Miscavige took over, when L. Ron Hubbard was running Scientology up and through the 70s and into the early 80s, Scientology was a growing, expanding thing. It had gone from, you know, a couple foundations in 1950 to an international scope, truly, right? Where there were churches opened up around the world, and people were happy with Scientology, and they were doing Scientology, and it was kind of this thing that was growing. And it never, by the way, got up to millions of members, ever. I'd say at the height of its expansion in the late 70s or early 80s, it was probably up to 400,000 or 500,000 people. But they've always lied about the numbers. So the way that started was, in the early 70s, a couple of Sea Org executives were asked, you know, how many people were in Scientology, and they said, oh, I don't know, you know, and they sort of pulled this number out of their butts. They said, well, I you know, based on how many books L. Ron Hubbard sold, there are 1 million Scientologists. And then what happened was the next year, well, now how many are there? Well, it can't be less than 1 million, so 2 million, right? And it just sort of like grew from there. And now Kirstie Alley goes on Howard Stern last year and says there's tens of millions of members. Total nonsense. Absolute, total crap. I've actually held the list in my hand of how many members there are in the International Association of Scientologists, and it was not more than 100,000 people. So I'm just telling you, I know this is true what I'm telling you. So anyway, under Hubbard, though, my point was that under L. Ron Hubbard, it was a growing movement. Right or wrong, good or bad, whatever, it was. When Miscavige took over in the early 80s, and especially after L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986, and Miscavige came out as the leader, it has been shrinking ever since. Now, David Miscavige, I could say a lot of things about this guy, but I think it's a very safe thing to say that he's not really that interested in getting new members. He's more interested in getting money. And there are a core number of people in Scientology, they're called whales, who give a lot of money. A lot of money. I'm talking about millions and millions of dollars. And Scientology has grown financially as a result of that, even though its membership has been gradually shrinking. In the 2000s, at the beginning of the 2000s, it became apparent that this was a real problem, because Scientologists The lower level people, you know, the thee and me, want to see it expanding. And they can rationalize all kinds of nonsense about how it is expanding, even though it's clearly not. But it's only going to go so far. When you go to your church every week, and there's only 3 people going on courses, or you only see a couple people doing counseling, you're like, isn't this ever going to get bigger? Aren't we spreading the word? Aren't things getting better? And especially when you go to these semi-annual gatherings and David Miscavige stands on a stage and says, we're growing, we're bigger than ever, everything's great. And they show all these crazy, you know, faked up displays of more and more people in Scientology, but you go to your local organization and there's nothing, it's empty. It's just this right here would be a huge class of people at any Scientology church right now. So that, you know, there's the reality, and then there's this fantasy, right? And these things weren't meshing. So in the early 2000s, in the early years of 2000, about 2002, 2003, David Miscavige came up with this new plan. It was a new marketing plan. I call it marketing. He called it, you know, this big expansion plan for all of Scientology, where he stood on a stage and he told everybody, the reason Scientology isn't huge and isn't big like it should be is because our churches are not a true reflection of Scientology's magnificence and L. Ron Hubbard's, you know, awesomeness as to what they should be a reflection of the greatness of our technology, of our methodology, of what Hubbard wrote, right? They call it technology. So they say the tech, or the technology, right, is this wonderful, beautiful thing that frees beings and makes the world a better place. And our churches are these little podunk operations that don't reflect that. And so because they don't, and because they're so tiny, and they're not doing enough, and they're not big enough, that's our problem. There it is, right there. And everybody said, yeah, that's what it is. It was a masterful sales job, because if you reduce it down to what I just said, it sounds ridiculous. But he actually spent 3 hours explaining the whole thing to all the Scientologists on the stage. And he convinced them that what they need to do is this new international program called Ideal Organizations. Ideal organizations. All of our organizations need to become ideal organizations. And this was an international movement that he launched. And what he said is, and this happened here in Cincinnati, they have an ideal organization now. If you go in their building, it's beautiful. It's this great looking building. It's empty, but it's beautiful, right? Because he was totally wrong. It had nothing to do with buildings. What this was magical thinking. It was, if you build it, they will come, right? That was the whole concept. And all the Scientologists who kind of buy into magical thinking already bought into it. So so what he said was, here's the program, and they've been doing this ever since. All the members of each local church organization, whether it's anywhere at all, right? Los Angeles, Denver, Cincinnati, whatever, need to fundraise. All of you guys, if you're all Scientologists for, let's say, Cincinnati, all of you guys, right? We're going to fundraise, and we're going to find a building that's going to be great. It's going to be the best building ever for us. It's going to be huge. We're going to expand like crazy. We're going to have tons of people come in, and what's going to happen is you guys are going to hold fundraisers, and we're going to raise the money for this locally, and you guys are going to make Cincinnati happen, right? Because you're going to take responsibility for Cincinnati, right? That's how they word this stuff, right? And what they do is it took them years to do it. They're still doing it. I mean, there's only a handful of these churches that have done this, but they have gotten the parishioners, and I use that term very loosely, to donate and donate and donate and donate and take out second mortgages and take out loans and cash in their kids' college funds and donate millions of dollars in each local area, and they've selected out a building and they bought it. And then they got them to do it all over again to pay for the money, to get the money raised so that they could renovate that building. International headquarters didn't pay for any of it. They just said, this is what you guys need to do, and the parishioners have been donating and fundraising and beating each other senseless over this for years, until they could buy the building and then renovate by international church management. And so you end up with an org like Cincinnati here. If you guys go down there, you'll see a beautiful building. It's like a museum. It's empty. But boy, it really looks nice, you know, and it does. And that program is called the Ideal Org Program, okay? I'm telling you all of that because me, after I was doing recruitment for a year and I was successful at it and getting people into the C organization, they put me onto working on these ideal organizations because that was still a thing. This was around 2009, 2008, 2009. And I was one of a handful of people who traveled around to different organizational locations. I started in Las Vegas, I worked in Orange County, Portland, Washington, Seattle, Washington, Pasadena, California, and then finally in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. I worked personally on each of those organizations. And I worked on getting staff for them, recruiting staff for those organizations is mainly what I was working on. And recovering, when you open up one of these big buildings, you want a lot of people in it. So, and you got to get more people to give more money to even do it in the first place. So, what I was doing for years is I was running around knocking on doors of people who used to be Scientologists and trying to get them back in the fold. And I was actually really good at it. And in a nutshell, the way you do it is somebody came into Scientology for a reason, and then that reason didn't get fulfilled, and you just pump up that reason again, and they get all excited about it again, and then you get it back. Because you can still handle that ruin, right? Whatever that thing was that they want to handle. So I was really good at that. But the reason why I say I was lucky to be on that, for me personally, is because I got to see something that most Scientologists don't see. I got to see these organizations before, during, and after their opening as ideal organizations. So I saw them as the little podunk place, then I saw them open up, and they open up these buildings with great big fanfare. They close the streets, they get thousands of people to fly in from around the country, and they have speeches, and the mayor comes, and the city council member comes, and it's a whole PR fest. And then there's this big opening, and they cut a ribbon, and David Miscavige usually shows up and gives a speech about how amazing Scientology in Cincinnati is, and how it's the hub of activity for the tri-state region, and we're going to clear this whole region, it's going to be great. And everybody gets all crazy and happy, and it's all wonderful, and lots of balloons fly up in the air. Well, then I was there the next day, and everybody was gone, and the place was empty again. Because it's not true that if you build it, they will come. It doesn't happen to actually be a reality. And Scientology is not doing any better as a result of buying great big buildings and renovating them. It's, if anything, all these great big buildings show is how pathetically small they are. But they keep doing it. Because the guys in each area, the guys in the Cincinnati region, don't ever talk to the guys in the Las Vegas region, so they don't know. And when they get together for these yearly events, they're shown these puff piece PR things that make it look like everything in Las Vegas is great. And they look around in Cincinnati and go, well, we're not doing so great, but God, Las Vegas is, so I guess it must be on us.
And we better
Right?
have the same, our shape, make us like this.
Exactly. And all the public and all the staff actually buy into this. Now, the guys in Las Vegas know they're not doing great either. They had to, call everybody and do this big puff piece, and they go, but they're not about to tell Cincinnati, well, we really aren't doing that good. I mean,
We're not doing as good as you guys think.
yeah, because Las Vegas, see, the whole trick of it is this little mind control deal where everybody thinks everybody else is doing so wonderfully. And so they all keep themselves going, and they keep themselves pumped up on this crap. Going around from place to place to place, it was undeniable. We were failing miserably everywhere. There was no question about it. I'm gonna say that I definitely fell for some stupid stuff for a long time, but even I'm not that stupid. And after all those years, I couldn't deny that we were failing. And that this whole ideal organization thing was a dismal, horrible disaster. And I was working on having opened up Minnesota in the Twin Cities region in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I worked very hard on that place, and I was up there for, I don't know, a couple of years, recovering people to Scientology, and then we opened up the building. They bought an 80,000 square foot children's museum. I mean, it's huge, this place. It's gigantic. They had, before we opened that place up and somehow got a bunch of staff in there, there are a total. I'm intimately familiar with Minnesota, for example, Scientology Minnesota. I actually sat down and made a list one time. And remember, I was running around recovering people. Like, I know everybody in that region. 115 people. Wow. That's how many Scientologists there are in Minnesota. 115. And they somehow thought that it was a really good idea to buy an 80,000 square foot building, this old museum, fix it up like crazy, a beautiful building. And they're like goldfish swimming around in them. It's
what supports it? You say there's all this money, but there's not enough people to support it. Even with the whales, you're still looking at all
well, with the whales, you actually end up with quite a bit of money, actually. Because, again, all the money that does come in goes up. So what happens is, the one advantage to these ideal organizations is that the church owns the building. Prior to this, the churches leased buildings or rented spaces. And having worked in management for 8 years, it was really hard to keep them in those buildings because they had rent troubles all the time because they weren't making enough money. Because all the money would come in and go up. It didn't stay at the local level. A lot of money that comes in goes up. So we had to bail them out, which was the only time the money came back down because we can't have a church close. That was just unacceptable. So this was a real problem. So one problem that the Ideal Organization program solved is it put the property in church hands. No more rent, no more leases, no more rent troubles. All the churches have to pay for now is keeping the lights on. And because the church is a tax-exempt organization, there's no property taxes.
Is that the local churches or the
all of them?
local organizations?
All of them. But mainly I'm talking about the local organizations, right? And there's about, I don't know, I've lost count, 112, 120 local organizations throughout the world. So, so rent and leasing, that was an issue. And what this did is since the Church of Scientology International, all the parishioners paid for the buildings, but the deed is held by Church of Scientology International. So it's not like the local organization owns that property. So that's why it's an asset of international management. And that's why the church can be worth billions, because the property goes to the church property, right? And any day, if David Miscavige wanted to, he could just sell the property outright under the church parishioners. They wouldn't have any say in it whatsoever. Anyway, so having seen that for myself, it became undeniable to me, finally, that there was an issue. There was a real problem here. And while I still believed in L. Ron Hubbard and the methodology, the auditing, I still thought it had some value, I knew David Miscavige was full of it. And I knew that this organization plan that he had, that had everybody working on, was not happening, and it was not real. And I then decided I was done with the Sea organization. And so by December 2012, in May 2012 is when I said, okay, I'm quitting. By December, they let me go. It took me that long to kind of get out of the whole thing. And I was done as a Sea organization member. I was now a regular part of the world and back in the fray, right after 17 years of having done Sea organization. So there were some adjustments. It was interesting. But in a nutshell, one of the other things that happened is, as you can imagine with an insular group like this, with a cult mentality, when you leave that organization, when you stop working for the Sea organization, you're kind of persona non grata. They don't really appreciate that. There's definitely a caste system that goes on in this whole thing. And I was kind of treated pretty badly. My reputation was kind of smirched. The people that I used to work with were now telling, the regular run-of-the-mill Scientologists that I was not a very nice person, I wasn't a good person, that I was actually a horrible person. The term they use is out ethics. It's more and you break your contract, you sign up to work for them. If you leave before your contract is up, sorry, back up a second. When you're a staff member for the Church of Scientology, the services that you receive, you get Scientology for free. You get classes for free and you get auditing for free as an exchange for working for the organization. If you can make the time to make that happen, right? And since you're working your butt off, you don't have a lot of time, but sometimes people work that out. And they move up those levels of Scientology as a staff member. That's supposed to be the #1 exchange that Scientology can provide, because they aren't paying you much of anything. It's all voluntary wages, and you're not making much of anything. But you're saving thousands of dollars by getting all these services. However, if you break your contract before and you leave before your contract's up, you are given a debt where you have to pay back for all the services that you did as a staff member, because you're considered a freeloader. Okay? This is Hubbard policy, man. It just goes round and round. So the Sea Organization is a lifetime commitment. So breaking your contract means you leave before you're dead. And of course I did that, right? After 17 years I was done, so I left. So I had a freeloader debt. It was actually not as much as you might think. A total is, I think if I actually added the whole thing up, I think it was about $10,000. I paid a good chunk of that. I know. Because they forbid you from doing anything else in Scientology until you pay that debt. It's a punishment, right? Definitely, no question about it. Staff members at the local churches, there's 2 kinds of contracts they can sign, 2.5 years or 5 years. You sign up and you commit to that degree of time to be a volunteer for the organization. And all of your services are free during that time unless you break your contract and you have to get this freeloader's debt and you pay it back. So that's another hook they have in you to keep you on board once they've signed you up and keep you in, right? Okay. But actually, by the way, I guess you guys don't know this, but when you sign up for the Sea Organization, you actually sign a billion-year contract. So it's not just one lifetime. You're signing up for eternity. We gotcha. So
Does it say that on the contract?
yeah, it does. Yeah. It's a religious commitment. Right?
Sign in blood.
I'm just like, yeah, billion-year contract. I hereby commit for 1 billion years. Yeah. They say it's symbolic, but nobody in the Sea Org. See, because you believe as a Scientologist that you are living life to life to life, you really do buy into that. They say it's symbolic, but that's just PR. Everybody in the Sea Org. And when the Sea Org, when a Sea Organization member dies, because people have gotten old and died in the Sea Org at this point, it's been around since 1967. They issue a memoriam, a sort of an obituary on the person, where they sort of talk about his life and his contributions and how great the guy was and all that. They try to acknowledge the person somewhat, and they grant them a 21-year leave of absence. And they're supposed to come back after 21 years and come back into the Sea Organization, right, to fulfill their obligations. So,
How many done that?
I've never seen
How many
anybody
come back? Any else?
I've never seen anybody come back. Although there are people in Scientology who truly believe that they were Scientologists last lifetime, and that they did Scientology before, and now they're coming back. I have
They
seen
had a
that.
big off the road to start. They knew what they were doing.
That's right. That's right.
They were confused.
So, all right. So anyway, yeah, pretty goofy stuff. Pretty goofy stuff. So having seen that, and then, yep. Oh yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So, wow, time just flies. Okay. So, having seen all that and gotten out of it, and then being persecuted for it, right? Because now my reputation was being besmirched. Now I was like a bad guy. I went on the internet to try to start finding out. I knew there was bad stuff on the internet, but Scientologists police themselves on this. They get in a lot of trouble within the organization if they go looking at anything criticizing the church. And this is a common characteristic of cults, is self-criticism is not a luxury that they can afford to have. And you do not do that ever. And you get into a mindset again where you police yourself on that, right? So Scientologists don't know what you guys would know in one evening of reading the internet. I'm telling you, they don't. Because they police themselves on it. And I had very much been part of that. So when I got out, going on the internet. I did. And 2 months later, I came up for air. I could not believe the stuff I was reading. It was shocking. I had questions I didn't even know I had questions I found the answers to. And it was quite a mind trip. And I was very, very upset, to say the least. I felt a great degree of betrayal and anger at having been taken advantage of for 25 years. And that's basically the bottom line on what happened there. I had gotten out of the Sea organization. I had left my wife behind. I divorced her because she wanted to stay. I wanted to go. So I wasn't married anymore. I had formed a new relationship with a woman who was a Scientologist. As I went down this rabbit hole, I started finding out things that were really not okay. She didn't want to know about that. She left me. And I ended up speaking. I was so upset that I needed an outlet. And so I started posting anonymously on the internet about my own experiences with the church and how pissed off I was about what I had discovered. And there are places, there are internet forums and chat rooms and things like that where you can go as a Scientologist or as an ex-cult member to do that. And I was doing that, and it was very helpful to me. The church found out I was doing that. They figured out, they monitor these boards. These guys are the most paranoid people you just would not believe. They monitored the boards, they figured out from what I was saying who I was, and they tracked me down because I was still, a Scientologist. And they confronted me on that and said, "You've been posting on the internet, and that's a very bad boy, and we're excommunicating you." And I said, "Okay, well that sucks." And as a result of that, and this last bit I'll tell you about, I was disconnected. And that is it's a shunning. It's the word. It's shunning. Okay? Scientology disconnection is probably the most harsh form of shunning that exists, even beyond the Amish. It's bad. Families have been broken up over this. Mothers split from their kids. Fathers. It was bad. This is how I lost my fiancée, because she used to wanted to be in Scientology. She could no longer communicate to me. Friends I had for decades, gone. And that's no joke. They do not talk to you, see you, hear you, nothing. You're just out of their lives. And businesses have been broken up over this. I mean, it's not a small thing. So that's a control mechanism that the church holds over its members. And if you want to know why a lot of people are still in Scientology, it's because if they leave openly, they will be disconnected from their business partners, their mothers, their fathers, their kids, and it's a control factor that the church holds over them. So that happened to me in December 2013, a year after I left the Sea organization. I was fully out, and I've been speaking out ever since. Started a YouTube channel and a blog and recovering. And I was going to talk about that a little bit more, but I ran out of time. So all I can say about the recovery process is it's been gradual. It's been very, very wonderful to experience all the things I've experienced since leaving the church and gradually getting the mindset, all that responsibility and all those Hubbardisms and all that stuff gradually flushing out. And the biggest, there's a number of things, I really shouldn't even say the biggest, but one of the most crucial things that helped me very early on and set me on this path where I'm at now, where I'm sitting here talking to you, was learning about critical thinking and learning about science and reason and skepticism. It saved my thinking. I stumbled on it on the internet one day when I was doing these internet searches, and I came across James Randi, and I came across Carl Sagan, and I came across Richard Dawkins and Penn and Teller, and I was like, oh my God, right? To go from a Scientology mindset where everything is so certain, everything is so sure, they know everything, Hubbard knows everything, to go from that mindset of I know everything, which is a cult mindset, and it's not just limited to Scientology, to go to a mindset of recognition that I don't know much of anything, and that's okay. But there's nothing wrong with that. In Scientology, it's you're screwed up and you're a bad person. You're not a superhuman if you don't know everything. To go from that's been the change. To now, more honest place to be. And that's been the curve of the recovery, right, out of that mindset. And I've actually been told I've gone through it pretty quickly. I think that's one of the reasons why. I think that recovery is something I'll be doing for the rest of my life. It's not some end state you reach. Not when you're in something for 27 years, no way, right? You don't just like snap and you're not in that mindset anymore. But critical thinking, logic, skepticism, and reason have been giant milestones for me getting out of this thing. And I now no longer hold any part of the beliefs of Scientology. I don't believe that it has any validity or special uniqueness. And the more I found out about destructive cults like the Unitarians, Mormons, JWs, all of those things,
Christians.
the more I've found that Scientology is a very tiny, very common, very simple cult. And that's really all it is. And to have something that was the all of my existence reduced down to, yeah, no, not so much. That's pretty good. I think that's pretty good. And I wanted, the only reason that I do anything now in terms of speaking out or coming out here or talking about this is to prove people up against it in the first place and try to reach those who are still inside and get them out. So I guess we don't have time for a lot of questions, which sucks
Here's what we're gonna do. We have 5 minutes for questions, but I know you want to tell your recovering story. I know there's a lot of questions. I ran out to Bar Louie's. They can hold 10 to 20 of us.
Great.
And then we can have a drink if some of you want to get something to eat, and then you can ask Chris questions. And he said he's 2 hours ahead of us, so he's gonna stay up all night to you.
I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
So we got a few minutes now if they want to answer questions.
Okay, great. Yes.
Just really quick, you
Yeah.
mentioned it, Orwellian.
Yes.
You mentioned like 5 things from 1984. I mean, it's like double thing and
That's right.
new speak words, like
Thought police.
everything. There's
Yes.
so many parallels.
Yes, the Orwellian parallels are amazing. Yes. Yes.
Are your parents still in the organization?
They are not. My mom actually got out before actually both of them got out before I did, and they sort of kept that news to themselves so that I wouldn't disconnect from them. And then when I got out, they were like, ah! So yeah,
It lives everything.
that's right. Yes.
Are you part of like a network of recovering Scientologists, ex-Scientologist people, or is it you're just not enough of you out there? Is there few far and few between, or is there actually a network?
There are, in terms of a network of recovering Scientologists, there is a message board called Ex-Scientologist Message Board that people go to, some anonymously, some not. There are those of us who do speak out. There's in terms of ex-Scientologists, there's a gal out in Los Angeles named Carindale Carriere, another one named Tori Magoo, Tori Chrisman, who have YouTube channels, who I actually found and went to. There's a guy named Mike Render who has a blog every day. He posts stuff. Marty Raffin. Mike and Marty were in the documentary Going Clear. So there's not really like I guess that's about as networky as it gets. Yeah. Yes?
Have they gotten more aggressive than the shunning since?
This video is part of my series on the basics of Scientology, my critical analysis of Scientology's philosophies and methods. I thought before we get too deep into that series, I should first give an overview of the path to spiritual freedom and personal immortality which Scientology promises. I'll go over the history of this and then cover the various services Scientology offers. In this first part, we're going to cover the lower grade chart up to the OT levels, which as you'll see is a lot. In the second part, we'll cover the upper grade chart with the OT levels and advanced Scientology training levels. Let's get to it. In Scientology, the series of training and counseling services are collectively called the Bridge to Total Freedom, also known more formally as the classification, gradation, and awareness chart of levels and certificates. The analogy of a bridge is a concept Hubbard actually came up with in 1950 when he wrote the final words of Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. One might here use an analogy of bridge engineering. Let us suppose that two plateaus exist, one higher than the other, with a canyon between them. An engineer sees that if the canyon could be crossed by traffic, the hitherto unused higher plateau, being much more fertile and pleasant, would become the scene of a new culture. In this handbook, we have the basic axioms and a therapy which works. For God's sake, get busy and build a better bridge. Throughout the 1950s, Dianetics and Scientology counseling, or what they call auditing, did not follow a strict regimen. Instead, Hubbard came up with many different procedures and approaches, and auditors would do whatever they felt was right for the person they were auditing, following very loose guidelines from Hubbard. Dianetics was all about the reactive mind and directly addressed past incidents of pain and unconsciousness using a recall or regression technique. By 1952, Hubbard was developing procedures designed to pull a person out of their head, spiritually, a state he called exteriorization, and then get the spiritual being, or Thetan as he called it, to perform exercises on the body or in the physical universe that would free it from its mortal anchors. That didn't really pan out so well, so by 1955, Hubbard was coming up with what he called objective processes, designed to have a person move around and look at his environment and touch and interact with real-world objects rather than engage in subjective, thinking-type processes. These objective processes were supposed to orient a person in the real world and bring their awareness to the current moment. In Scientology, this is called being in present time, and is a highly valued ability that Scientologists practice as a kind of ever-ready panacea. If a person is in present time, so the reasoning goes, then their attention is not stuck in the past on traumatic incidents which plague or distract them from what is going on right now. At the same time, in the early to mid-1950s, Hubbard posited a new state of spiritual awareness in existence called operating Thetan, or OT. This was far beyond the promises of the state of clear that Hubbard had made in Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. One of the final descriptions of this state Hubbard settled on was a Thetan exterior who can have, but doesn't have to have, a body in order to control or operate thought, life, matter, energy, space, and time. Another was willing and knowing cause over life, thought, matter, energy, space, and time. And that, of course, would be mind, and that, of course, would be universe. But even more simply, an individual who can operate totally independently of his body, whether he had one or didn't have one. He's now himself. He's not dependent on the universe around him. This state of OT is the ultimate prize in Scientology, and is why people stick with it for as long as they do and pay as much as they do to get through all the counseling and training services that Scientology offers. But again, through the 1950s and early 1960s, all of the processes and techniques Hubbard developed were rather randomly carried out on Scientologists with no fixed path or set way of making it to OT. There were a few stabs made at standardizing things, but these were always short-lived because Hubbard was constantly coming up with new processes and ideas as to what it would take to get people to clear an OT. Until November 28, 1963, when Hubbard gave a lecture called 7 Classifications, where he talked about organizing the administration of auditing and how it required bringing people along on a gradient approach, meaning there was no one-shot clear or OT procedure, but instead a series of processes which had to be carried out in an exact sequence, each one increasing a person's responsibility level and ability. These were divided into 7 classification levels, meaning each level had an associated class of auditor who was required to deliver the auditing. Hubbard put this in writing in a policy letter of November 26, 1963, called Certificate and Classification Changes, Everyone Classified. This was a major shift in how Scientology operated worldwide and changed how auditors were trained and how people received Scientology auditing. Hubbard then spent months refining and revising this classification system throughout 1964. By May of 1964, it was broadly announced worldwide with refined nomenclature that has lasted to this day to describe the various levels, classifications, and grades in what Hubbard called the gradation program. Further changes were made as problems came up and as Hubbard developed more and more techniques. In September 1965, Hubbard even filmed a lecture for broad distribution describing the newly revised classification and gradation chart and explaining its use. He added 52 levels of awareness from unexistence at the bottom all the way up to clear at the top. From this point forward, this chart became a central reference point for all Scientologists and gave a clear-cut path from brand new Scientologists to operating Thetan. Revisions and changes have been the order of the day for years with this chart, but the basic layout has remained pretty standard since the early 1980s. As you can see, it's split into two halves, the left side being Scientology training and the right side being auditing. Theoretically, one could go through all the levels on the auditing side without doing much on the training side. But training is heavily encouraged because Hubbard's books and lectures are supposed to give each Scientologist a unique understanding of themselves as spiritual beings, how their mind works, and how they got so screwed up over the millennia of their existence here on Earth and in earlier civilizations on other planets, going all the way back billions and trillions of years to when they first entered the physical universe. That information is mainly contained on the auditor training levels. To briefly walk through this, let's start at the bottom and work our way up. On the training side, it starts with a book auditor, meaning someone who has read Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, and can deliver basic Dianetics auditing. This is simple one-on-one regression therapy, which does not use Scientology's e-meter. After that comes the Hubbard Apprentice Scientologist and Hubbard Qualified Scientologist courses, which give a basic overview of Scientology principles and some practice doing light forms of auditing, such as basic memory recall, assists, and simple objective processes. Then comes the Student Hat, a course that teaches Hubbard's study methods. Then comes the Professional TRs course. The TRs, or training routines, on this course are numbered 0 through 4 and are drills that are supposed to teach good communication skills. After learning Hubbard's ideas about good communication, one sits for many hours with another student, also on this course, and practices doing these drills. I'll be covering in another video just what these drills consist of specifically and why they are potentially harmful to people who do them. Following the Pro TRs course is the Professional Upper Indoc TR course. This course focuses on TRs 6 through 9, which teach a student Hubbard's methods of control. In Scientology auditing, it can sometimes be necessary to physically control the person receiving the auditing and make them carry out auditing commands even if they resist or don't want to do it anymore. This is especially true when doing objective auditing. The student on this course is trained to ignore the protests or complaints of another and get them to carry out whatever command the student is supposed to get executed. Once the TR courses are done, comes training on the Hubbard e-meter, or electropsychometer, a device which is supposed to be able to register the thoughts a person has in response to auditing commands and questions. I will also be doing another video about the e-meter itself because there is a lot of lore and myth connected with this device, most of it wholly undeserved. The e-meter is a simple device that registers resistance to an electric current that runs through a person's body when they hold the electrodes, or cans, that are hooked up to the meter. That resistance comes from the body, not the person's mind or spirit. But Scientologists are trained on this course to believe otherwise. They do an extensive series of drills that are supposed to result in someone who can make a meter respond no matter who is holding the cans and can therefore use the meter to do Scientology auditing. What we've covered so far are the prerequisite courses to do formal Scientology auditor training. Let's bounce over to the lower level processing services and catch up to the level we've gotten to on this training side. First, there is the purification rundown. This is a detox program which involves sweating in a sauna for 5 hours a day and taking massive amounts of niacin and vitamins. According to L. Ron Hubbard, drugs or heavy chemicals can impede a person's ability to think because the drugs stay lodged in the fatty tissues of a person's body and can come back into effect, recreating past incidents of pain and trauma. In Scientology, this is called restimulation. So by sweating these toxins and drugs out, the person is supposed to be rid of their harmful effects. The end result is freedom from the restimulative effects of drug residuals and other toxins. The program is based on pure pseudoscience and is in fact potentially deadly to people who do it. I've detailed the specifics of this program in a separate video, and the link to that is in the description below. Once a person is supposedly detoxified of drugs and chemicals, they then do the survival rundown. This is basically a simple series of objective processes that is done on a co-audit basis, meaning 2 students learn how to do the objective processes and then proceed to spend 100 to 300 hours or more auditing each other on them. If someone doesn't want to co-audit, they can pay for a professional auditor to do these objectives on them instead, but that would cost a lot more. The end result of the survival rundown is a person oriented in the present time of the physical universe with new perception, awareness, and control of one's environment, body, mind, and thought. Next is the happiness rundown, which is a series of processes to clear up past transgressions and mistakes a person has made against a moral code L. Ron Hubbard wrote in the booklet, The Way to Happiness. This moral code includes precepts like honor and help your parents, and do not harm a person of goodwill, as well as standards such as do not murder and do not steal. By addressing these past incidents of poor moral conduct, a person is